Inspiration Move podcast. My name is Zoe, and this week we're going to be talking about a question that's come up in Run Club a few times, and it's about how do you recover from a race. And obviously that's going to differ depending on the distance, but I thought we'd talk a little bit about what that looks like. So the first thing is you probably want to think about the distance and also the intensity. So there's some general rules, which is in terms of recovery, you're probably looking at 1 day per kilometre of the race. So what that looks like is 5 days for 5 kilometres, 10 days for 10 kilometres, 3 weeks for a half marathon, and 6 weeks for a full marathon. And that can seem kind of long, but we're not talking about you not having a break from running for that whole period. That is just that's the point at which you would start to then feel like 100%, like you could give 100% in hard workouts again. So it's going to go on. There's going to be a period of time where you have complete rest, and then there's going to be a period of time where you're running, but you're probably still feeling a bit fatigued, and you want to be focusing on sort of more recovery in between your runs. And then there's going to be a period where everything sort of stabilizes. And it's also really going to vary depending on the intensity. And I've had marathons that I've recovered more quickly from than hard 5 kilometres. So it sort of depends how that feels for you, and what your sort of 5 kilometres is not a natural distance for me, although I wonder if it's a natural distance for everyone. It's just one of those things where it does take, it's a huge demand on a whole range of energy systems, 5 kilometres, so it can be a little bit deceptive in that way. But for most people, I'd probably say my hardest 5 kilometre run, I probably needed 2 weeks recovery from. So it's not going to blow out much further than what you'd expect based on those sorts of things. And generally speaking, for things of, like half marathon and shorter, I would kind of look at not running for at least 2 days afterwards. And for the marathon, I'd probably look at, it's much more like 4 days, really, sometimes 5. Plenty of other things that you can do in that period of time, but usually you'll know pretty quickly if it's too soon, and that can be hard after a run like that to then have that break. But it does make it a lot easier, and it's just one of those things where, just like you would have your taper for your event, you want to have that kind of like in reverse for your recovery. And also you really want to be focusing on your nutrition during that period of time. It's completely natural to have like maybe 2 days after the event where you are not hungry in any way, shape or form, and then 3, 4, 5 days later you've got insatiable hunger. So it's just a good opportunity to eat as intuitively as you can, to just give your body exactly what it needs. And although you do want all of that recovery, you also want to keep moving, because that's going to help your recovery. So the first day, that might just be walking to the fridge and back. But after that, you can start looking at things like yoga, stretching, going for a walk, going for a swim, that kind of thing. I would just sort of stay away from anything that's going to be impact your intensity, anything like that. You can go to the gym, but just pick lighter weights, choose to go slower than you would normally go, and just take the time to have that space, because it's not just physical recovery, it's mental recovery, because races take, and any events really take a lot of sort of focus, and there's a lot of build up, and there's a lot of emotional energy that goes into that. And so if you bounce from one thing into the other all the time, then that's going to be really mentally draining after a while. So it is something that you want to not just sort of respect the distance in terms of your physical recovery, but also respect the distance in terms of giving your brain a break after all of that, because chances are you had to do a lot of work in training, you had to talk yourself into workouts you didn't want to do, you had to sort of like talk yourself into trying something that you weren't sure that you could do, and then you had to sort of like go through the taper and then go through the sort of I mean, I'm not sure if I'd say pressure, but just sort of the anticipation and the expectations that you might have for your race. And that can be hard to take that space, particularly if maybe it didn't work out like you wanted. But it is a great time to take that gap, because even if it didn't work out like you wanted, it doesn't change the amount of effort that you put into it. And it's also something to be really aware of when you get to the sort of the end of the running season, which for us in Australia tends to be around November or so, which is kind of an easy time to take a break because it starts to get quite hot and stays that way until February. So that is a great time to actually treat that as a different period than your normal training period. And generally speaking, I think that pretty much everyone should take at least 2 weeks completely off running in that time. And you really want to get to the point where you are really really aggravated with not running, and not sort of like get it, like, you know, you can easily say, oh well, that happens after 2 days, but at a minimum taking that 2 weeks off and doing other things to give your body that physical break from the impact, and because you often have a lot of accumulated fatigue that you have been essentially carrying through the year, but much more importantly, that mental break. And it's a great time of year for that to happen, because it's generally, I mean, it depends where you live, but it's generally not fantastic running conditions anyway. So it's a great time of year to focus on your cross training, focus on other things, just enjoy time with your family, because a lot of times you'll have like people on holidays and everything else. And it's just a great time of year to have a more relaxed approach. And so this year, or no, was it this year? Last year, I guess, I'd had the 2 weeks off, because I finished up in November and I had 2 weeks off, and I was probably becoming slightly unbearable at home towards the end of those 2 weeks. But it was a really, really positive thing to do. I just, you know, went to the gym, I did swimming, I went walking. It's good to have that reset, and it's also really good to have a period of time where you can work on what your mechanisms are for stress management and time for yourself and self-care that aren't running. And particularly having had that really long period of injury, I think that if you are regularly having periods of time where you're not using running as the only thing that's going to fulfill those needs, then you're just going to be in a lot better shape when you do have periods of time off. And the final thing to remember is that you just need to be patient with yourself, because it's not going to be a straight line. You're going to have weeks where you feel fantastic, and then you're going to have like a couple of weeks where you're really feeling the fatigue, and it's just the kind of thing that you just have to roll with and listen to your body, and not worry about how long it takes. Just stay engaged with the process of where you're at. And that can be more challenging when you've had an event and you're going into a second event rather quickly, like particularly say if there's like a 3-week turnaround or something like that. And with that, you've just got to keep in mind that you get so much more out of full recovery than you would out of training. You're not getting any more fit at that point in time in between those two events. So it's just all about how recovered can you be. And so generally speaking, what you can kind of do between events that are close together like that is just kind of it's essentially like another taper period. So the first week would be, you have like the first half of the week off, and then do like a couple of easy runs under 30 minutes, and then the next week maybe do something at 40 minutes. Maybe if you were feeling good, you might do some light intensity work, but just sort of like at a moderate pace, not at full pace. And then if you are then going into the third week before your event, then you'd throw in a couple of quite short workouts in there, just to sort of get your body to feel like what it's going to be like in the race, but for a really short period of time. So what that might look like is like where ordinarily you see tempo runs in there, 20 minutes or like 5 kilometres or 8 kilometres or whatever it is. When you're doing that in a taper week, it's much more like 3 kilometres, or 15 minutes or something like that. So something really short to like wake up your muscles and say, hey, we're about to go here, but not so long that you're going to have any issues at all with recovery. And you can also do like I quite like the fartleks in that week too. For that reason, is that it's just sort of like short bursts of speed, plenty of recovery, and just really short, sharp sessions in that period of time, just to kind of remind your legs what you want them to do. And the one extra piece of the puzzle is to do with strength training afterwards, is that generally speaking, because you will have started to taper off your strength training a couple of weeks before, and then you've had your race, and then you've had some recovery from your race, you're actually going to be relatively deconditioned at that point to your strength training. So when you go back to the gym, you want to be like really doing half of what you would normally do. So, like half of the weight, half of the intensity, just like go way easier than what you think that you need to go, because that really intense soreness after strength training is essentially just being deconditioned. And so if you start off slower, that won't happen, and you also don't want to be going super intense or super hard when you're in your recovery period anyway. So just build it back in slowly, and even with things that are body weight based. So when I go back to doing all of my rehab exercises after a race, I'm kind of doing like maybe 50 to 60% of the repetitions, and just taking it easy to just sort of build back up to it more slowly. So I probably would then take 2 to 3 weeks to build everything back up to where it was before, and that way it's just a lot easier for my body to cope with. So that's it from me for this week. The podcast is now also up on YouTube in video form if you prefer to look at it as well as listen to it. It's certainly not something I occasionally get to sort of watch podcasts on YouTube instead of listen to them, but it tends to be when the kids aren't home. So occasionally I get to, but if that's your thing, it's up there and you can take a look at it there. I will be back next week. Any questions that you'd like me to answer on the podcast, just send me a message, email, Instagram, Facebook, whatever's easiest for you, and then I can have a chat, whatever you'd like to have me talk about, I will. And I will see you next week.